Hey Chem Kids, Campbell here. Now that you've memorized all your elements, it is time for our next thing in nomenclature, which is to memorize the polyatomic ions. So you're probably wondering, what is a polyatomic ion? Well, a polyatomic ion, poly means many, atomic, atoms, ion means it has a charge, a plus or minus charge. So it is a group of atoms that are bound together and they stick together. And like I said, they either have a positive or negative charge, but they act as a single unit. So this list here is the list of the ones that you have to memorize. There are actually more, but these are the only ones you have to memorize. So if we take a look at them, here's our first one. Here's ammonium, and it's one nitrogen. So the number on the bottom here indicates how many of that element there are in this polyatomic ion. So there's one nitrogen, and there are 4 hydrogens bound together as a single unit, and it has a charge of a +1. Here we have phosphate. Phosphate is phosphorus, one phosphorus that's bound to 4 different oxygens, and it has a charge of -3. Carbonate, which is carbon, that is bound to 3 oxygens, and it has a charge of -2. Bicarbonate, which is carbonate but with the hydrogen. So we throw in hydrogen on there, we call it bicarbonate, and now it has 1 less charge, so a -1. Hydroxide. Hydroxide is one that kids mess up a lot because it's hydroxide and the H is actually second in the formula. So it's O bound, oxygen bound to a hydrogen, has a charge of -1. There is acetate, which is my favorite one. It's 232CHO. 232CHO. And it has a charge of -1. There's nitrate, which is a nitrogen with 3 oxygens, and it has a charge of -1. Nitrite is nitrogen with 2 oxygens and -1. We have chlorate, which is chlorine. Cl is chlorine. It's bound to 3 oxygen. It also has a charge of -1. Chlorite, which is chlorine with 2 oxygens and a charge of -1. Sulfate, which is sulfur, 1 sulfur with 4 oxygens. It has a charge of -2. And sulfite, which is sulfur with 3 oxygens and a charge of -2. So write those down, make yourself flashcards, and memorize these. Only one of the polyatomic ions that you have to memorize has a positive charge. Positive charge ions are actually called cations, but that's ammonia, NH4 +1. And by the way, if there's no 1 here, it's just plus. That implies that it's +1. All the rest that you have to memorize are negative charges, and negative charge ions are also called anions. Now, except for a few, like hydroxide, the name of the first element in acetate, the name of the first element in the ion starts the name of the polyatomic ion, right? So when we had nitrate, NO3, it starts with N, so we call it nitrate. That means there's nitrogen present. When we had any of our chlorates, right, ClO3, it's called chlorate because chlorine's present. Or our sulfate, it's because sulfur is present. Or phosphate is because phosphate is present. And carbonate is because carbon is present. So a lot of the negatively charged ones, that first element is how the name starts. The other thing you should have noticed is that all of the negatively charged ones have oxygen present. So when you're doing your polyatomic ion formulas, when you're writing formulas for names, if it has a negative charge to it, if it's not ammonia, there's going to be some oxygen in it somewhere. And you'll notice that some of the endings are ate or ite, nitrate, nitrite, chlorate, chlorite. And what that has to do with is how many oxygens are present. Now, it doesn't tell you the number, because if you look at like nitrate, there are 3 oxygens, and sulfate has 4 oxygens. But if you look at the ite versions of those, nitrite has 2 oxygens, so it loses an oxygen to become nitrite, whereas like sulfite is SO3, so it loses an oxygen to become sulfite. So the ates and the ites are different by 1 oxygen. So here's our nitrate, and there's our nitrite. Notice that the charge is the same. It's still -1 for both of them. It's just the oxygen is different. There's our chlorate. I don't know where chlorite is. Maybe the build isn't working, but there is our chlorite. Sulfur, you have to know sulfate and sulfite. Now you'll notice this has a charge of a -2. And then we have our phosphorus one, that's our phosphate. You do not have to know phosphite though. So that one, the ite version you don't have to know, but the chlorite version you do. So I'm not quite sure why it's not on this little slide here. But phosphate is -3. So one of the things you'll notice too is the ate or the ite doesn't indicate exactly how many oxygens are present or the charge. So that's why you have to come up with some tricks to try to memorize these. Here's our carbonate and our bicarbonate. Again, carbonate does not have an ite version. But it does have a bicarbonate, which is also sometimes called hydrogen carbonate, and it's just we stick a H on it, and then but this is where the charge changes. So it was -2 and now it's -1. Oxygen with hydrogen is called hydroxide, and here's our acetate, our 232CHO -1. That's our acetate. So these ones, the words aren't similar at all to what it looks like. So those are ones that you'll have to especially work on memorizing. All right, that's all I got for polyatomic ions, but there's a trick, and we're going to talk about that trick. It's called Nick the Camel when in class. So we'll talk about these in class.